exactly what we're seeking this support for.
I appreciate that. And the last item that we want to go into is the barrier. Barriers put in needs to be removed eventually, but it's the question is the funding source. Why not state water project funds to remove?
Thank you, Senator Wilk. I think this gets at one of the great enigmas of California water, the concept of beneficiary pays. And while everybody agrees with the concept, it's rarely straightforward or easy to implement. And I think we all have got scars from that particular debate. Let me speak to one of the comments in the staff report. The department and the State Water Project, in concert with the Central Valley Project, has routinely implemented construction of rock barriers in the South Delta over time, particularly at the head of Old River to protect fish, and then the complementary barriers to protect water levels for South Delta diverters for some period of time. We do that because we're mitigating the direct effects of project operations and charging the projects as appropriate. It's our position that in this fourth year of drought, it's not the project's causality or fault, if you will, that salinity intrusion is a threat to California water supplies this year. Clearly, if the projects were not in place, salinity intrusion would certainly occur even deeper into the Delta and further upstream into tributaries this year, if not for the releases the projects make as just part of their operations. But more to the point of who benefits, I want to be clear that I believe the risks of salinity intrusion in the Delta extend far beyond the State Water Project and the CVP. In fact, the Contra Costa Water District, the city of Antioch, perhaps the cities of Tracy and Stockton are all at risk, as well as many users upstream in the Sacramento system, if it should come to pass that we have to release additional water from upstream reservoirs to provide for salinity control, then the opportunities for other use of that water upstream, as well as providing cold water to protect fish, would be lost. So we believe that this is one of those occasions where it's hard to describe this as a benefit, but it's really a mitigation of risk, applies to a broad set of communities and stakeholders. And much as we have a history of funding Delta subventions out of the general fund, because we know that maintaining Delta levees is important to such a broad swath of water users and statewide interests, we believe it's appropriate to use general fund in this case to fund removal of the barriers.
All right. I want to ask a few more questions about what really has happened to the policy, because I'm confused. So we no longer, in 2009, when the legislation was proposed that moved this BDCP forward, the process was to be an NCCP, and frankly, in my view, that was a really important goal of those who were voting for it. In fact, there's some question.
Co-equal goal discussion.
Right. And this is to Mr. Bonham, Director Bonham. There are other things that are important about an NCCP. One is that the standard is higher. So if we're no longer doing an NCCP, then the standard becomes what?
Good. Very important question, Senator. So I took the time to look again at the Delta Reform Act in 2009. I was not, while at Trial Unlimited, actively engaged in that. And
I know this predates
my
the administration. I understand.
My reading of that act is that NCCP and the federal analog, the Habitat Conservation Plan, was not a required, if you will, mechanism. It's described, I think, and slotted in as clearly what parties were intending to try to achieve. But the act also has another pathway, which was if not an NCCP, HCP, then when the board evaluates its change petition around a new point of diversion, board shall evaluate things like ecological flow, et cetera. I'm paraphrasing. So it strikes me that and I hesitate to say this knowing you were involved, the architecture of those crafting that act may have had a preference, but also knew that potentially a BDCP as an NCCP may not work. Therefore, all these other requirements in the act would apply if the path became something other. Here's my description of the legal standards.
That's what I'm finding out from Bill.
You are correct that in order to grant a permit under the NCCP, wherever, and we've done some and are working on some in the Delta in other forms, we must make a series of findings which boil down to the totality of commitments can get us to recovery, meaning, healthy, kind of sustainable. Yeah. And that is exactly the goal I live for. While the project has a new pathway, here's how the permitting would work under the new pathway. The federal government would do what's called a Section 7 consultation under the Federal Endangered Species Act. It would be looking at the federal actor, the Bureau of Reclamation, and determining whether their action of this project would jeopardize the continued existence. So the standard now would be jeopardy. Okay. And similarly, our State Department would be looking at what's called a 2081 permit, and it's the similar, threat to continued existence. I actually believe that this could be superior from the perspective of managing, at least for the aquatic species. Here's why. Under the NCCP approach and the idea of a 50-year structure, the amount of assurances and certainty and expectations was so ladled together in a confusing mix. It was not possible to provide a 50-year certainty both on the water supply front and on the species protection front. Under a Section 7 and a permit from me approach, the projects will be managed on a continual basis against a threshold of jeopardy, and if things change, you've got initiation of reconsultation and potential for adaptive management right there because of the force of the function of the different type of permits. That's how the projects are managed now under the biological opinions. That could prove to be a more specific and instantaneous management regime than trying to chart out a 50-year approach. But I think you've got a really good point. What happens to all that good stuff you were trying to do to achieve recovery? And this is a task I have. I want to take every conservation measure 2 through 22 that's good in what we were trying to do, and I want to put it into an existing authority and program. We need to do predation. We need to deal with methylmercury. We need to deal with unscreened barriers. We need to restore habitat in the Delta. We need to do all that stuff we wanted to do. I'm going to try to find home for it, put it in programs, and get it in play. I hope that was more helpful than confusing.
That's helpful, but the question remains for me. We have a 2009 Delta Reform Act, which speaks to the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, and speaks to its incorporation into, that has dual goals as well as caring for the Delta. All that's in statute, including the NCCP. What you're describing, where is that in statute and its relationship to the canal?
Well,
I mean,
fair enough. In my read of the
I voted for
2009
none
Act,
of this, but I remember the conversation.
Yes.
fair
And
enough,
how important,
It passed at 5 a.m.
fair enough.
but how important it was to many people who supported it that the NCCP, not solely because of the recovery standard, but also because of the process involving the NCCP, the public process, the hearings, there was a clear requirement for governance, for example. Where then in statute is going to be this new, whatever it is, this new approach? I mean,
Fair question.
what is the role of the Delta Stewardship Council?
Yes.
What's the plan? And then I'll get to the canal.
I have 3 responses. First, in my personal judgment, you could conclude I'm wrong. The 2009 Act establishes an important statutory goal. They're 2 co-equal goals, and we're going to achieve them. From there, it doesn't require only the use of an NCCP to achieve that goal. There's no language that says thou shalt only achieve these co-equal goals solely through an NCCP or HCP. So the question becomes, if not that approach, what is the alternative approach? And I think this takes me to my second response. I believe Cal Eco Restore accomplishing 30,000 acres in 3 years plus more over time, combined with evaluating Cal Water Fix on its own merits, and if I can fulfill this commitment to you, finding a home for all the other good conservation commitments in totality can actually be a program that achieves the co-equal goals. You may be a great skeptic of that, but that's my answer on the second question. Third point I'd make is I do not believe we will be successful in the Delta without the Delta Conservancy and me standing next to them on any restoration we do in the Delta, finding the best way to do it. And I start with that thinking around the 30,000 acre target for Cal Eco Restore.
If I could, Senator Wolf?
Yes, Director Cowan.
Let me just add to Director Bonham's response. First of all, let me also say that the NCCPA approach and standard is a great institution, and I would only look for ways to strengthen it and make it more accessible to more parts of California's important ecosystems. But my read of the Delta Reform Act, for what it's worth, called out that if the Bay Delta Conservation Plan met the NCCPA standard, then we had a pathway into the Delta Stewardship Council's Delta Plan. Without meeting that standard, now we will have to approach the Delta Stewardship Council without benefit of the pathway provided by the 2009 legislation and ask for their consideration to be adopted into the Delta Plan. I'd just like to make one more point, and this was what I was trying to say earlier. The NCCP standard, the HCP standard of recovery, laudable goals, but these are voluntary permits. And the quid pro quo here has always been try to achieve these levels of recovery, and you'll get assurances in response for that, and thus the 50-year term, which has been so controversial. And it's also been assumed and has been past practice that a public contribution would be part of what distinguishes a Section 7 avoid jeopardy approach from a recovery standard HCP approach. And my point, my previous point that I was trying to make is that if we're going to talk about a public contribution that actually raises us above avoidance of jeopardy to recovery of Bay Delta species, trying to do that within a permitting process for controversial Delta tunnels is not a healthy place to have that discussion. So therefore, let's segregate the parts. Let's deal with mitigating the impacts of project operations, including construction and operation of the new Delta conveyance facility, which we believe, of course, is a necessary component of Delta restoration. But then let's have the discussion about how we get beyond simple mitigation to a conservation strategy outside of the context of a permitting strategy for Bay Delta tunnels.
You mentioned something that I want to follow up on. The 50-year permit were the assurances to the contractors that gave them I think, the willingness to move forward as far as they did on this and to fund as far as they did. Now that that's gone, which I don't think was ever really achievable for all the reasons you described, not practical, not assured, simply not practical. Now that those assurances are gone, what is the value to the contractors in moving forward with this?
I have several different ways I could answer this question, but first of all, let me say that I think the water agencies that would be the beneficiaries of the project should speak for themselves, and they have, of course, expressed in general what I heard after our announcement in this change in approach is, well, we'll have to see. So they're still digesting the approach and what it means to them. First of all, let me say that I think that in the early days of consideration of what this HCP would be, the notion of assurances was oversold. The fact of the matter is that permit terms could always be revoked if we didn't meet a recovery standard, and in doing so would require great investment of water and money on the part of the permit holders, plus a public contribution that would have to be made in order to maintain the status of the permit. So the idea that there was ever a rock-solid guarantee of a water supply was just inappropriate. So there's a little bit of resetting the baseline as to what the expectations should have been going into this project after 8 or 9 years of hard-earned experience here. My better answer, at least the one that motivates me, I believe that the purpose of Delta conveyance is to address one specific issue that plagues the Delta, and that's this issue of unnatural reverse flows, which pulls fish from the northern part of the Delta into the southern part of the Delta where mortality is high. That's a separate issue than how much Delta outflow will ultimately be required to provide for mitigation or recovery of Delta species. My thesis is that regardless of what that answer to what the ultimate Delta outflow requirements will be, both species and water exporters will be in better shape with this modernized Delta conveyance system in place.
All right, I have 2 more questions, and then I want to move forward to lunch. The first is that often in the public discussion, the administration says, well, you don't have an alternative. The water fix is the same as it was before the announcement about the habitat piece. So it's the same project. So it seems to me that why hasn't there been a similar review of that as well in light of the reduction in assurances, which is clear, which I think made it valuable for the contractors to move forward. And the administration comments that are made is that there's never an alternative. Well, I think just recently in the newspaper, because that's the only place this apparently gets a hearing, is Craig Wilson, who I think we all know who he is. He is excellent former executive director of the Water Board, water master for several years, working in the Delta with, just years of experience, proposes an alternative that's probably worth looking at just because it's a whole lot cheaper and it might be more, there might be more assurances as to flow. Why is it that these things, that given all of this change, the water fix remains exactly the same?
Well, my response would be that I doubt if there have been many CEQA NEPA processes that have considered as many alternatives as we have in this process, and we'll produce a document that has, I lost track now, I believe 16 different alternatives that will be fully analyzed. We've been at this for 8 years. There's always a little better proposal out there to consider that might start us over again. When the right idea that comes along that sets us back and makes us really reconsider what we're proposing comes along, we will do so. I'm no more wed to this proposal than I am any other proposal that accomplishes the goals that we are trying to accomplish here. I can't speak to the specifics of Mr. Wilson's proposal. It hasn't undergone 8 years of scrutiny as the alternatives that we have before us today have gone through. I can say that we did step back and spend weeks within the administration considering whether or not we were on the right track with the specific preferred proposal that we're putting forward here, specifically delta conveyance of 9,000 cubic feet per second with the type of design features that we've talked about here, including the efforts we've gone through to reduce the local impacts that would be accompanying that project. At the end of the day, we believe that we've got really two choices. We're going to build this type of project that provides new opportunity to divert delta waters that we've diverted from the South Delta in the past in a way that's more modern, more protective of species, or we're going to see a multiple decadal decline in the ability of the project to do its job. And we find that approach to be just not in the state's interest or economic well-being.
Let me just ask you one question. Currently, you're in the midst of this environmental review process. At the same time, internally, are you involved in design and construction of any one of the alternatives? Preliminary design or preliminary design and drawings and things?
Right. Well, these are terms of art, of course.
I know.
Naturally, there's been some level of design that's necessary in order to come up with a proposal that can be subjected to an analysis of its impacts. So we have...
And the funding for that?
All of the funding for any of these plans, formerly Bay Delta Conservation Plan and now Cal Water Fix, comes from the state and federal water contractors.
But there is design going on?
Well, very limited design necessary to complete the environmental permitting process. An investment in the kind of design necessary to actually do a construction bid is a long ways away and many more hundreds of millions of dollars away.
All right, thank you for that. I'm not going to belabor this much longer. Thank you to my colleagues on the committee. And I do want to just add one thing. I actually think your hiring of David Okita was a masterstroke, having worked with him for probably far longer than you've been alive. I think he's, having worked with him on the Solano County Water Agency, Puda Creek Council, been on both sides of, opposite sides of serious controversies, water controversies, and then working together quite well. I think that's an excellent idea, and I think going to a realistic goal of 30,000 that you can really achieve is a good idea. And I take you at your word that the partnerships that I know that you support and have worked on all your life will be the way that you'll approach this issue with the Conservancy and with landowners, and that's the way you do business. So I'm looking forward to that. So let's move on to the staff recommendations that we have in front of us. Let's see. Senator Nielsen asked that we separate out 1, 2, and 3. 4 is off the table. So number 1, you're moving item 1, which is to deny the January proposal. Fish and Wildlife requests the administration submit a report January 10th, 2016, with its January budget proposal, including a revised plan for the BDCP Interagency Ecological Program. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Thank you. Public comment. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. We wrote a fairly lengthy letter to the committee about the State Water Board funding proposal for the Bay Delta water quality planning activity. We don't oppose their ability or authority to do it. We oppose the use of water rights funding to do it. And let me explain why. In the BCP, if you read it, it's very clear that this is part of compliance with Port Cologne and the Clean Water Act. There's a reason it's called a water quality plan. It's not related to any water rights petition or anything that the water rights holders are asking for, number one. Number two, the Water Rights Fund was created, or it was funded by general fund until 2003. Over the objection of the State Water Board in 2003, it got moved to fee payer. That funding formula that was imposed has been ruled by the courts currently to be unconstitutional per the Sinclair Doctrine. So we're just going to be digging the hole deeper because this will be further reimbursement we'll probably get. Moreover, post-Sinclair, in the current law, there's a thing called Prop 26, which amended the Constitution. And there is a case that came down, published a Court of Appeal decision in the Reading case, which basically said every time a discretionary act is taken by a legislative body on a fee, in this case you're going to be increasing a fee, it's subject to Prop 26. And in the Reading case, they invalidated a shift of ratepayer funds to the general fund of the city of Reading. That case is applicable here. Unless there's a direct benefit to the fee payers, i.e. the water rights payers, to do the water quality plan, you cannot use water right fees. And to do so would require a 2/3 vote because it would be a tax or a 2/3 vote fee pursuant to the constitutional amendment. And the language in the constitutional amendment is very clear. It says that there has to be a specific benefit, privilege, government service, or government product directly to the payor of the increased charges that will not be provided to those not charged. So under both Sinclair, the existing water rights program fees have been deemed invalid. It's on appeal. Under Prop 26, which is the new law, it's clearly a violation of the Constitution. And so what we think you should do is do what the Assembly, we believe, did today, which is use general fund to fund the program. We have no objection to them doing the water quality planning. It's just a question of the use of our money. And finally, I would leave you with the thought that not all water rights holders are subject to water coming through the Bay Delta. On record, opposing the bill, this proposal are not only my client, the San Luis Delta Mendota Water Authority, Westlands, Western Growers, who I'm here for, Ag Community Water Agencies, but also folks like the Imperial Irrigation District. I would like to hear an explanation of the nexus to Imperial Irrigation District of doing Bay Delta water quality plans. They get water from the Colorado River. So this is something that we think is an overreach. It's last minute. And again, general fund is fine. So for those reasons, we have concerns. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Next, please. Again, please. You're welcome.
Bob Reeb, Government Relations on behalf of the Valley Ag Water Coalition, which includes CVP water contractors and state water contractors. We concur with previous speakers' comments.
Okay, thank you. More public comment? Come forward. We have mics on either side. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. Pablo Garza with the Nature Conservancy, and this may, I'll be concise because one of the comments to the GGRF funds for Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I think we understand the concern raised about using those funds for mitigation and agree with that. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind for the entire expenditure plan as budget negotiations intensify over the next few weeks. But just note that in our conversations with administration and staff, it was not ever the intent to use these funds for mitigation. I think Director Bonham addressed that square on in his testimony today. But we think it'd be really important to keep that $40 million on the table to use. There's a lot of good projects on public and private land that could be done that sequester carbon, that deliver other benefits, and I think it'd be a shame to not put that money in the budget for expenditure. And the final point is just, we appreciate your comments and as well as Director Bonham's on the role of the Delta Conservancy. And, going back to the 2009 Act, they were established to do restoration of the Delta, and I think they should play a really important role in this going forward. So, thank you.
Juan Altamirano with Audubon, California. We echo the previous speaker's comments.
Thank you very much. Welcome.
Lauren Hajic on behalf of California Fresh Fruit Association, California Dairy Inc., California Citrus Mutual, Western Agriculture Processors Association, as well as some other agricultural organizations. For the same reasons Mr. Manning stated earlier, we oppose using the Water Rights Fund for funding of the new positions for the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, but agree that it's important to update the plan, and so that money should come from the general fund. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, we have item 1, again, was moved by Senator Nielsen. Please call the roll.
Senator Wolf?
Aye.
Senator Nielsen? Aye. Senator Pavley?
Aye.
3-0. Item 2 and 3, 4 is off calendar. 2, approve the State Water Resources Control Board may revise plan proposal and deny the general fund request for the emergency salinity barrier. All right, it has been moved by Senator Pavley. Please call the roll.
Senator Wolf?
Aye.
Senator Nielsen? No. Senator Pavley?
Aye.
All right, 2-1, that is supported. I believe, Catherine, we are finished? Yes, yes. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.